나 아직 좋아하잖아.
This beautiful girl is shocked. The man she just met invited her to a one-night stand. The innocent girl was willing to give everything because she was captivated by the man's good looks. Their brief encounter sparked a whirlwind of passionate feelings. However, the happiness they shared, even to the point of getting engaged, ended up falling apart halfway through. Their meeting happened 3 years ago in the summer. Jaewon took a month off to vacation in the Yangon area so he could pursue his hobby of surfing. Upon arriving at the airport, Jaewon was picked up by a beautiful tour guide named Yoon-sun Ah, who also worked as a greeter for arriving tourists. During the trip, Jaewon was immediately captivated by Sun Ah's beauty and her cheerful, easygoing personality. Casually, with a man she had just met, the girl played a Western song and sang along to the lyrics loudly. Sun Ah also invited Jaewon to sing along with her without any hesitation. Even though she was a bit quirky and her way of thinking was hard to predict, Jaewon truly found himself falling in love with Sun Ah's uniqueness. He felt that his vacation would be even more exciting if he could be near her. As Sun Ah ran toward the edge of the beach, Jaewon couldn't take his eyes off her. At night at the ramen shop, tourists from various countries gathered while enjoying a variety of dishes. They also played many of the games provided there. From a distance, Jaewon kept watching Sun Ah, who was always smiling at the guests. He even joined in playing the games. At that moment, Sun Ah greeted Jaewon, who was engrossed in playing games until he won the match. Unexpectedly, the lights suddenly went out, and it turned out to be a sign that an exciting group game was about to begin. Soon after, participants were asked to find a partner and pair up. While Sun Ah was confused about finding a partner, Jaewon suddenly stepped up to her, took her by the hand, and led her to the center of the arena, and together they managed to win the game. Sun Ah accepted Jaewon's outstretched hand with a cheerful smile, drawing everyone's attention to the two of them. The atmosphere became even more beautiful when fireworks lit up the night sky. The next morning after waking up, Jaewon was truly surprised to find his car suddenly parked quite far from the beach. When he opened the window, he was once again startled by Sun Ah's sudden arrival as she greeted him with an adorably cute expression on her face. It turned out that Sun Ah came that morning because she wanted to invite Jaewon to practice driving. The reason was, the day before, Jaewon, while extremely sleepy, had unknowingly agreed to her request. On the stretch of sand, Sun Ah drew a pattern that would later become the driving course. She then taught Jaewon how to drive properly and occasionally criticized him whenever he went off the track.
참 제대로 깼지? 얼른 타! 운전 연습하러 가게.
Not long after, the two of them continued their journey back to the beach. While in the car, they seemed to grow even closer. Jaewon started joking around by teasing Sun Ah, who got scared when they passed by the police. The next day, Sun Ah was amazed when she saw Jaewon surfing. She thought about wanting to learn how to surf in the ocean like Jaewon, but Sun Ah was still reluctant because she was afraid of drowning. Until the next morning, when she suddenly stood in front of Jaewon's car, imitating the movements of someone surfing. Not long after, the two of them were ready to practice surfing together. At first, Sun Ah was on the surfboard, mimicking the moves that Jaewon taught her. But after a few practice sessions, Sun Ah managed to conquer the incoming waves and stood balanced on the surfboard. Unfortunately, after moving quite a distance, Sun Ah suddenly fell when she was hit by another surfer and her head struck a coral rock. Worried about the wound on Sun Ah's forehead, Jaewon immediately took her to a safe room and treated her injury. The two of them were in a very close position, which made the atmosphere awkward. Unexpectedly, Sun Ah suddenly kissed Jaewon's fingers and brought them to her lips as a signal to start a kiss. In the end, Jaewon landed a passionate kiss on Sun Ah's lips, but their second passionate kiss was interrupted when the sound of a surfboard falling over in the wind was heard. Not long after, Sun Ah began to gently stroke Jaewon's hair and planted a sweet kiss on his lips, which Jaewon lovingly returned. The two of them then continued their romance on the camper van bed. Jae-won repeatedly expressed his feelings, telling Sun-ah over and over how much he loved her. Actually, Jae-won felt a bit uneasy because Sun-ah never responded to his declarations of love. However, that didn't dampen the passionate desire they both felt for each other. The next morning, Jae-won woke up smiling as he recalled what had happened the night before. But then he was left puzzled when he realized that Sun-ah was no longer by his side. It turned out that Sun-ah was already at the beach, walking her pet dog. Without any sign of guilt, Sun-ah seemed very close to another man, which made Jae-won feel extremely jealous.
What?
Unbeknownst to Jae-won, Sun-ah was deliberately putting on a fake romance with him. Sun-ah was actually a fake name she made up while on vacation. For Sun-ah, the romantic relationship that night was just for fun and a way to vent because she was dealing with serious problems. It was different for Jae-won, who genuinely loved Sun-ah, but ended up feeling hurt because he felt like he was being played. As the two of them walked side by side, Sun-ae tried to avoid Jae-won's hand when he tried to hold hers. That made Jae-won curious, wondering if he had made a mistake during their night together or if he had said something that hurt her feelings. Sometimes, he even tried to comfort himself. From the very beginning, he shouldn't have trusted a girl whose identity was still unclear.
너 지금 나 갖고 노냐?
That afternoon at the ramen shop, Jae-won deliberately came by to greet Sun-ae and ask her what kind of movies she liked and if she would be willing to watch one together the next day. But the girl ignored him. Jae-won kept trying to get Sun-ae's attention by playing the guitar with a sweet melody. He hoped that Sun-ae would come over to him and ask him to teach her how to play the guitar properly. However, the reality is not as expected. Finally, as night approached, Jae-won wrote an apology letter in a book. He then placed it on the window near where Sun-ah worked. Jae-won hoped that Sun-ah would be willing to visit his camper van again that night. On the next page, it was written that Jae-won was really looking forward to Sun-ah's arrival at 8 o'clock in the evening. If the girl arrived late, it would mean that Sun-ah wasn't serious about loving Jae-won. After reading the letter, Sun-ah felt conflicted because she couldn't just leave her job. Moreover, her shift didn't end until 10 o'clock.
나 오늘 10시까지 일하는데.
On the other hand, Sun-ah really wanted to meet Jae-won because this was the first time she had felt the sincerity of a man, having previously been abandoned and ignored after making love. In fact, Sun-ah had intentionally wanted to push Jae-won away and let him be just a one-night stand. However, Jae-won's continued concern for her eventually touched Sun-ah's heart, and she resolved to ask Rera for permission. Sun-ah was then allowed to go home early so she could meet Jae-won. Meanwhile, after waiting for so long and with the person he longed for still not showing up, Jae-won grew tired and ended up turning his car around, leaving the place where they had promised to meet. Sun-ah ran as fast as she could to catch up with Jae-won's car until they finally met and embraced each other. After hugging and confessing their feelings, Jae-won and Sun-ah fell asleep together in the car, and the next morning they woke up filled with happiness. When they opened their eyes in the morning, Jae-won admitted that he had fallen in love with everything about Sun-ah. Even all the interesting books he had read so far couldn't compare to how captivated he was by Sun-ah's beauty. In the middle of Jae-won's words, the girl asked Jae-won to promise her one thing. If one day he meets a different person from now, Jae-won must promise not to be angry with them. A few moments later, heavy rain suddenly poured down and drenched the camper van. There was a beautiful sight that took Jae-won by surprise when CNA suddenly stepped out of the car and started dancing in the pouring rain. He found himself swept up in the happiness that CNA was feeling. For the first time, Jae-won joined in playing in the pouring rain and danced joyfully with the girl he loved. Jae-won then hugged her, wishing that this happiness would never end. After drying themselves off, the two of them sat together and enjoyed a cup of something warm. Feeling comfortable with each other, Sienna, a bit hesitantly, asked Jae-won to extend his vacation to a month so they could spend more time together. Jae-won enthusiastically welcomed the idea. He even started planning to stay with Sienna forever and marry her soon. Hearing this, Sienna became very nervous, but she wanted Jaewon to propose to her in a more unique and romantic way. The next day, Jaewon granted Sienna's request and proposed to her by calling from a nearby payphone. He then sang a romantic song expressing his deep love for her with a truly beautiful voice. The following day, the two of them agreed to hold a wedding blessing ceremony even though there was no pastor present. They each vowed to love one another and took turns kissing each other. Not long after, Jaewon took out a pair of rings as a symbol of their relationship and slipped one onto Sienna's ring finger. Now, the two of them were like a married couple, happily enjoying a beautiful honeymoon by the beach.
나를 영원히 사랑하겠습니까?
네!
Sienna and Jaewon hugged each other, held hands, enjoyed the beauty of the sunset together, and joked around until they burst out laughing. It was as if nothing could stand in the way of their love anymore. Sienna, acting playfully, teased Jaewon by painting his nails with nail polish. Jaewon felt annoyed, but he couldn't resist her, and in the end, they both ended up laughing together. When Sienna was working at the ramen shop, she no longer hesitated to show her affection for Jaewon by making his favorite ramen with a variety of extra toppings. Several pairs of eyes also felt happy seeing how well-matched the two of them were. Even that night, Sienna deliberately announced to all the staff and customers at the shop that she and Jaewon were a married couple living together. Not satisfied with just that, Sienna kept shouting along the street so that everyone would know that she and Jaewon were a couple in love. Day after day passed, and the two of them were so caught up in happiness that they didn't even realize they had spent 2 months together. Just when neither of them wanted to be apart, they were forced to separate by distance when Jaewon's father, who is a company president, suddenly called and asked Jaewon to return to Seoul immediately. Jaewon was asked to finish his project because, during his absence, his cousin Kyung-joon wasn't able to handle the work well and relied heavily on Jaewon's performance. Jaewon couldn't refuse, so in the end, he returned to Seoul. With a heavy heart, he left his lover, and before heading to the airport, he asked Sienna to contact him and meet him as soon as she was in Seoul. But in reality, 3 years passed and Sienna had truly forgotten about Jaewon. Jaewon, who felt abandoned without any clear reason, blamed Kyung-joon for this, since it was that man who made him rush back to Seoul. For years, Jaewon was never able to accept this separation. He kept wondering how Sienna was doing, whether she was still the same or had changed, and whether she still kept the wedding ring or had already thrown it away. After the breakup, Jaewon's days were filled with anxiety about why Sienna had forgotten him without a trace. Honestly, Jaewon could have let go if the breakup had happened because of a fight, but strangely, he was suddenly just abandoned.
아, 됐어. 하지마. 다들 잘났어 아주. 자기 문제 아니라는 거죠.
Jaewon has started to focus on his work as an architect at his father's company. But today, he received a harsh reprimand from the president-director because Jaewon was considered to have carelessly changed designs that had already been agreed upon by clients several times. On the other hand, Sienna, who now lives under the identity of Liuno, is going through extremely tough days. She started a marketing service business called O3, but its earnings are still far below the target. One day, Sienna visited a friend who works as a manager at a large company. Sienna begged to be given a job with a more secure position. On her way home from the office, Sienna listened to music that suddenly reminded her of the beautiful times she shared with Jaewon. Sienna realized how crazy she was back then, and now she has truly erased that chapter of her life. For Sienna, that event was just another side of herself that she intentionally created while on vacation, and now she has to return to her true self. Sienna's life in Seoul was quite miserable. Wherever Sienna went, she always drove her old, broken-down car, and the window couldn't even be closed. Unexpectedly, while stopped at a red light, her car ended up next to a luxury car driven by Jaewon, so Sienna tried to duck down so Jaewon wouldn't see her. This was the real side of Sienna that she didn't want Jaewon to see. a hardworking woman who lived in a cramped attic, far from anything luxurious. All this time, by being Sienna, Uno was hiding her true identity. Day after day passed, and Jae-won still couldn't completely forget those beautiful memories, still keeping all the things that reminded him of his romance with Sun-ah. He even still wears the fake wedding ring to this day. There's something he wants to ask if he ever gets the chance to meet Sun-ah again. He wants to know whether she still keeps the things he gave her or if she's already thrown them away.
내가 줬어 걔한테. 걔가 그 카메라 너무 좋아하길래.
While vacationing in Yangon, besides surfing, Jae-won also pursued his photography hobby and collected several limited edition vintage cameras. Those cameras are extremely valuable to him, to the point that no one else dares to touch them. But now, those items are in Sun-ah's hands. Jae-won brought 3 cameras with him on vacation, one of which is a film camera he usually uses to record the process of making surfboards. Before returning to Seoul, Jae-won, who was in a hurry, deliberately entrusted his 3 cameras to Sun-ah because he hoped that someday she would return them when they met again in Seoul. But as it turned out, the two of them never saw each other again after parting ways at the airport. Some people believe that those 3 cameras must have been very expensive and that Sun-ah has already sold them. He also assumes that the girl deliberately got close to Jae-won just to trick him and take his valuable belongings. Hearing that, Jae-won became even more furious and couldn't understand how there could be a woman who would be so heartless as to take advantage of him by selling his cameras after everything they had been through together.
야, 너 진짜 그렇게 사는 거 아니다. 야, 사랑을 가지고 놀아도 정도가...
Meanwhile, Sun-ah, who claimed she had thrown away all memories of Jae-won, actually still keeps them safely to this day. She accidentally found a roll of film stored on top of the fridge and planned to develop the photos inside. It turns out that Sun-ah no longer lives alone in her house, but now lives with a man named Kang-gun. The closeness between the two of them made Kang-gun's girlfriend jealous, which eventually led to the end of their relationship. Kang-gun's girlfriend even dumped him in the middle of the street and took back the clothes he was wearing because they were gifts from her. The next day, when Sun-ah visited the print studio, the owner of the studio actually recognized Jae-won's face in the photo. Sun-ah then tried to change the subject so the man wouldn't ask about her identity. Inside the film roll, all her memories with Jae-won are preserved. Back then, the two of them planned to take Polaroid photos and capture every moment they spent together during their vacation. The two of them visited beautiful places with mural-painted walls and took walks along the rocky beach. Since he didn't have time to develop them, Jae-won entrusted the film roll to Sun-ah along with his camera. At night, Sun-ah arranged the photos she had just developed and looked at all the beautiful memories captured on her film camera. Among them was a video recording of Jae-won working on a surfboard. At that time, Sun-ah was there with him in the workshop. Amidst his busy work making surfboards, Jae-won had actually prepared a gift, a pair of couple surfboards that he and Sun-ah would use together. He even recorded the entire process up to the finishing touches and asked Sun-ah to paint it together with him. Watching how beautiful those memories were made Sun-ah cry. She admitted that she really was a fake and a liar, but her love for Jae-won was not fake at all. It was completely genuine. Meanwhile, Jae-won, still upset when he thought about his missing camera, spent his time after work walking along the riverside in the middle of the city. Supposedly, this was the place where he was supposed to meet Sun-ah when they both arrived in Seoul. However, up until now, the girls still hadn't shown up. Everything about Sun-ah would always remind him of disappointment. By the bridge, he played a voice recording from Sun-ah, who had called him from a payphone. In the recording, Sun-ah could be heard deciding to end their relationship unilaterally and deliberately taking the camera with her. She also forbade Jae-won from ever contacting her again. That was the last time Jae-won ever heard Sun-ah's voice.
이거 경준이한테도 얘기 안 했거든. 뭐 굳이 다 말할 필요는 없잖아. 좋은 얘기도 아니고.
In her simple attic home, Sun-ah, also known as Uno, now lives with Kang-gun, who has turned one of the rooms into his writing office. The two have been friends since childhood and have never been involved in any kind of romantic relationship. In fact, they're more often seen arguing. For years, Kang-gun has chosen to stay single after his last romantic relationship ended. On the other hand, besides being friends with Kang-gun, Uno is also close friends with Seo-rin and Kyung-jun, who are a couple. At night after work, Kyung-jun and Seo-rin come over to Uno's house to play cards together. Meanwhile, Jae-won, who had just gotten home from work, suddenly gets a message from the owner of the print studio, who gives him a photo of himself with Sana from when they held a fake wedding ceremony on top of the camper van. This leaves him confused and wondering why Sana still kept that roll of film. Jae-won also suspects that Sana must still have his camera. Before heading home, Jae-won calls Kyung-jun and asks him to meet up. However, Kyung-jun, who is still having fun playing, instead asks Jae-won to come over to Uno's house and join them. Jae-won agrees and heads straight to the location.
은호야 와도 되지?
Hearing Jae-won's name mentioned and realizing he was planning to come to her house made Uno panic and try to hide. Unexpectedly, as Uno ran out of her house, she was almost hit by a car driven by Jae-won. In the end, a shocked Jae-won, upon seeing Sana, ran after her. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to find the girl he loved.
윤선아?
His encounter with Sana left him truly frustrated, so Jae-won spent the night drinking at a bar. Jae-won just couldn't understand Sana's way of thinking. She still kept their photos together, yet avoided him whenever they met. While drunk, Jae-won kept rambling that he needed to get his camera back so he could forget everything about Sana. Not long after, Jae-won, staggering, went to the police station and reported that a girl named Sana had stolen his camera. By reporting her to the police, Jae-won hoped he could find Sana and get his camera back.
신고합니다.
It turned out, the reason she left Jae-won and took his camera was because after Uno returned to Seoul, she found out that Jae-won was the cousin of Kyung-chun, her own best friend. Uno was afraid her fake identity would be exposed, since none of her friends knew that she had ever pretended to be Sana. When he arrived at the police station, Jae-won started to cry as he remembered his memories with Sana. He also told one of the officers that it wasn't just his camera that was stolen, but that he had also been deceived and abandoned by the beautiful girl he met at Yangon Beach. The lost camera was extremely valuable to Jae-won because he bought it with his first paycheck, and he couldn't accept that it was taken by that deceitful girl. Instead of getting sympathy, the police officers actually felt bored with Jae-won's actions, since it turned out he had reported his camera missing many times before. In fact, Jae-won often came in while heavily drunk. They thought Jae-won was just making things up because he was under the influence of alcohol. This was already the 6th time Jae-won had filed a report, and this time the police made it clear that if he kept reporting thefts without any clear identification, he could be charged for causing a disturbance. In the end, that night, Jae-won had to sleep in a jail cell. The next morning, the police called Kyung-chul to come and get his brother out of jail. After being released, Kyung-chul invites his cousin to enjoy warm soup so that Jae-won can have a relaxed chat and tell the chronology of events. All this time, Kyung-chul thought his cousin had started to lose his mind ever since he was betrayed by a girl. However, Jae-won kept denying it. He said he was just frustrated after running into Sana and wanted to catch her. But Jae-won didn't have the girl's identity or address. On the way home along the rocky river, Jae-won looked at the river with a face full of disappointment. He suddenly remembered his promise to meet Sun-ah, but the girl ended up breaking it. To keep Jae-won, who was thought to be getting addicted to alcohol, out of trouble, Kyung-jun took all the expensive beer from his office drawer and tried to hide it. He didn't want Jae-won to go even crazier because of the influence of alcohol. The next day, Jae-won, who truly wanted to forget Sun-ah, took the surfboard from the office storage and brought it to the disposal officer to get rid of it. But in the end, Jae-won brought the surfboard back because the officer refused to take it since the disposal stamp wasn't available. Not much different from Jae-won, Eun-ho, who was also trying to forget him, went to the used goods disposal office. She intended to throw away her couple's surfboard. Since it seemed like a waste to destroy a surfboard that was still in good condition, the officer asked if Eun-ho would be willing to give it away instead of throwing it out. Although she hesitated at first, in the end, Eun-ho gave her surfboard to the officer. That colorful surfboard was a witness to their time together in Yong'ong. Back then, Sun, and Jae-won were so happy painting the surfboard together. The two of them smiled brightly, hugged each other, and joked around as they smeared paint on each other's faces. During the process of painting the surfboard, Sun cheered Jae-won up by giving him a sweet kiss on the cheek. After they finished painting the surfboard, the two of them promised to go surfing together. However, because the waves were unstable, Jae-won and Sun ended up spending their time making love inside the camper van until evening, as a gentle rain fell and made the atmosphere even more romantic. Day after day passed, and all that was left was sadness. For Eun-ho, that surfboard was filled with memories and needed to be destroyed. After thinking it over deeply, Jae-won realized he didn't have any information about Sun-oh's identity and couldn't report her. Jae-won realized that all this time he had been foolish and too trusting because of love. However, Jae-won finally found a breakthrough and remembered that Sun-oh was somewhere near Surin's house. Jae-won then thought of retrieving the dashcam footage and asked Kyung-joon to take him to get his car's dashcam. But unfortunately, because his car was parked haphazardly near Eun-ho's house, he had to face the reality that his car was towed by the authorities. Unexpectedly, it turned out that Eun-ho was the one who reported Jae-won's car to the parking officers. She intentionally wanted to avoid Jae-won so he wouldn't be around her house anymore. Jae-won tried to remove the dashcam to prove Sun-oh's whereabouts. But unfortunately, 2 days ago, Kyung-joon had already removed the memory card from it without permission. Feeling like his efforts had failed made Jae-won furious, and he blamed Kyung-joon, so the two of them kept arguing the whole way. Not wanting to back down, Kyung-joon turned the blame on Jae-won, accusing him of being an alcoholic who was starting to lose control and often hallucinating. He insisted that there was no way someone who intended to steal the camera would dare show up in front of him. Kyung-joon's words made Jae-won realize, at least a little, that he really had started to go crazy all this time. Back before he met Sun-ah, Jae-won was a confident person who didn't drink excessively. Ever since he was betrayed by Sun-ah, Jae-won hasn't been able to accept reality. Why was it that after trying so hard and loving so sincerely, he was the one who got abandoned? That's what made Jae-won change into who he is now.
진짜 걔가 이 인터뷰 꼭 봤으면 좋겠다.
Year after year passed since his breakup with Sun-ah, and Jae-won truly lost his mind. Dozens of times, Jae-won went to the Cheonggyecheon River and wandered around aimlessly, then afterward drank a lot of alcohol and reported to the police that his camera had been stolen. Jae-won was even often found passed out not far from the river's rocks. After waking up the next morning, Jae-won didn't remember anything about having acted out of control the night before. Hearing from Kyung-joon that Jae-won had just been released from jail made Seo-rin feel sorry for him. She just couldn't understand how Jae-won had become so unstable now, when he used to be so dignified and successful in his career. Honestly, Eun-ho felt guilty hearing that, but she pretended not to know anything about Jae-won. While they were talking, suddenly a police officer on patrol showed up to check if their house was safe, since there had been a lot of burglaries lately. The arrival of the police made Eun-ho panic, and she suddenly ran into her room to hide. On the other hand, Jae-won, feeling that his condition was getting worse because he couldn't drink alcohol, went to the hospital to consult a psychiatrist. However, before he could fill out the form, Jae-won was suddenly greeted by a doctor who turned out to be a close friend from high school.
야 박지원, 웬일이야 갑자기?
Feeling embarrassed because he was caught consulting a mental health specialist, Jae-won ended up making an excuse that it wasn't him who wanted to consult, but his cousin. Jae-won claimed that it was Kyung-joon who was addicted to alcohol and often hallucinated after being dumped by his girlfriend. The doctor then invited Jae-won to have some wine together. But this time, Jae-won refused to drink even a little because he was trying to avoid it. While sitting with the doctor, who was completely drunk, Jae-won shared that he had been hallucinating and seeing the girl he loved. It wasn't just once. Before this, Sana had felt so real, as if she was really there greeting him. During the winter a year ago, Jae-won kept waiting at the Cheonggyecheon River, hoping that Sana would come to see him. But after hours of waiting in the cold, the girl never showed up. In the end, Jae-won went on to a soju bar and drank over a dozen bottles until he passed out. At that moment, Jae-won clearly saw Sun-a's face as she came to him, touched him, cried, and apologized for her mistake in ending their relationship. All this time, Jae-won tried to find out where Sun-a was and asked Rera about her, but nothing he did ever led to any results. In truth, Sun-a also felt guilty and admitted that she really was a bad person. She also hoped that Jae-won would soon forget her and live a better life.
내가 다 잘못했어.
At that moment, Sun-a was seen wiping away her tears and sitting next to Jae-won, hugging him and leaning on his shoulder. Jae-won thought it was all just a dream and wished that Sun-a wouldn't leave again. But not long after, the girl disappeared from his sight. Actually, what happened to Jae-won wasn't a dream but reality, because at that moment, Eun-ho was missing him and deliberately came to the cafe to see Jae-won. Eun-ho, who had now changed her mind, intended to return Jae-won's camera and send it to him by mail. But in the end, Eun-ho gave up on the idea because she was worried that Kyung-joon might be the one to receive it. Eun-ho then tried to take Jae-won's camera to the police station, but she was still hesitant because she was afraid of being accused of theft and ending up in jail. In the end, Eun-ho decided to go home and take the camera back with her. Meanwhile, Jae-won, who had just dropped off a doctor who was completely drunk, went on to visit Cheonggyecheon and walked around the area. After years of living in misery, Jae-won felt like he wanted to put an end to this foolishness and start living well.
진짜 이제 다시는 안 올라오고.
Unexpectedly, Jae-won suddenly saw Sun-a passing by near the river, so he shouted "camera thief" and immediately ran after her. It turned out that not far from there, 2 police officers were on patrol and joined in the chase. Eun-ho panicked and fell down and was eventually caught.
변호사를 선임할 권리가 있으며 변명할 기회가 있고.
Even though he felt relieved by this encounter, Jae-won couldn't stand to see Sana being accused of theft and having her hands handcuffed. So he handcuffed himself as well, so he could accompany Sana at the police station. He didn't want to let her go this time and hoped to find some clarity about their breakup. Honestly, all this time he never truly hated Sun-a and even wanted to stop hating her.
갑자기 수갑을 채우고 그러세요. 사람 놀라게.
His visit to the police station was actually just so he could find Sun-a and talk to her peacefully, hoping they could get back together like they used to be. All the anger he had felt for years suddenly faded away when Jae-won finally met the girl he had been longing for. At that moment, Jae-won even promised that if Sun-a would honestly admit the real reason for their breakup, he would be willing to forgive her and live together again. For him, marriage at that time was not a joke, but something serious and heartfelt. During the interrogation process, Jae-won held Sun-a's hand to comfort her. He even kept defending the girl so that the police would let her go. However, since Jae-won had reported her multiple times, the officers now had to process her according to legal procedures. After being caught stealing, Sun-a was finally questioned, and the camera, which was the evidence, was secured and photographed. There were 3 cameras in the bag Sun-a was carrying: a film camera, a Polaroid camera, and a rather classic digital camera. Instead of admitting her mistake in front of the officers, Sun-a actually denied it and lied. She covered up her false identity by making up a new lie and insisted that it was Jae-won himself who had given her the camera out of love. Hearing that, Jae-won was truly shocked and never expected that Sun-a would keep lying. In the end, Jae-won gave in and admitted that he had given it to her as long as Sun-ah would be released.
야, 너 내 핸드폰에 네 메시지...
Even though both of them were freed, the police still asked for Sun-ah's ID card as a legal procedure. Reluctantly, Sun-ah was forced to hand over her ID card, which was immediately snatched by Jae-won. As soon as he read the name on the ID card, which said Lee Eun-ho, Jae-won immediately lost his temper and scolded her harshly. He couldn't believe it. How could the girl he knew as Sun-ah all this time actually have the real name Lee Eun-ho? Jae-won kept yelling at Sun-ah for constantly lying to him, even though he wanted to forgive her and start their relationship over from the beginning. His disappointment had already run so deep that Jae-won finally left the police station with a furious expression on his face. After Jae-won left, Sun-ah tried to chase after him and almost got hit by a passing motorcycle. Jae-won then tried to stop his car right away to help her. The girl tried to explain and return the camera, but Jae-won, who was already furious, threw it onto the street and insulted her, calling her a tramp. At that moment, Jae-won was heartbroken because he didn't see a wedding ring on Sun-ah's ring finger. He believed that the girl didn't truly love him because in the past, they had promised never to take off their rings until death separated them. As an expression of his anger, Jae-won suddenly took off his ring and threw it into the river. This time, he was truly at the end of his patience and no longer wanted to open his heart to forgive Sun-ah.
내가 진짜 바보 같아. 내가 바보야.
During the journey, Jae-won kept cursing his own foolishness for being enslaved by love. He thought that he should have realized back then that he had fallen in love with that strange girl who was so lively and always cheerful. Jae-won was even willing to extend his leave of absence just for Sun-ah. Before his departure to Seoul, the two of them ran across the grassy fields and rolled around on the hills. They even once enjoyed the beauty of the moon and made love on top of the camper van. Now, all of it has become nothing more than a bitter memory that shouldn't be remembered anymore. That love story has truly ended because of a lie.
누구를 사랑했는지 모르겠네.
When he got home, Jae-won tried to find some alcohol in the fridge to calm his emotions. But it turned out he couldn't find a single bottle of his expensive wine collection because Kyung-joon had taken them all and brought them to Eun-ho's house to party with his friends. Meanwhile, Sun-ah, also known as Eun-ho, who felt guilty because Jae-won threw his ring into the river, tried hard to look for it. She bought a headlamp and jumped into the river at night just to find the wedding ring. It turns out that all this time, Eun-ho had still been wearing the wedding ring, but instead of wearing it on her ring finger, she used it as a necklace pendant. After hours of searching, Eun-ho finally found it wedged between the rocks. Not far from where Eun-ho was searching for the ring, the two police officers who had interrogated her were actually watching her. Both of them were truly baffled by the strangeness of Eun-ho and Jae-won and suspected that their love story must be extremely complicated, to the point that the girl faked her identity and hid her boyfriend's camera for years. One day, Eun-ho went to see a man to take back the surfboard she had once given him. However, the man refused to give it back, even when Eun-ho offered to buy it for a high price. Eun-ho tried to appeal to his sympathy, saying that the surfboard was something very precious to her, reminding her of someone who had once again found their way into her heart. Eun-ho also showed him her partner's ring, which she had found, and said that now she hoped to have her old surfboard back as well.
그냥 저한테 다시 파세요. 제가 딴 것도 2배 가격에 사드릴게요.
Eun-ho felt guilty at the thought of ignoring something given to her by the man she loved, who had also helped her discover her true self as Eun-ho. In the end, the man was moved and gave her the surfboard, which made Eun-ho very happy. Eun-ho then stored it in a shed near her house and deliberately covered it with a white cloth. Meanwhile, at his house, Jae-won was still preoccupied with thoughts of Sun-ah, who had lied to him by using a fake name. When he left the police station, Jae-won had actually hoped that Sun-ah would run to him and hug him, just like she did 3 years ago. But what happened was exactly the opposite. Jae-won felt that Sun-ah was a completely different woman from the Sun-ah he used to know. News about Jae-won successfully catching the thief eventually reached Kyung-joon. He also shared in the disappointment that Jae-won felt after being lied to by his first love. Even at the police station, the woman claimed that she didn't steal the camera. Instead, she said Jae-won had given it to her for free. When Kyung-joon asked about the woman's name, Jae-won admitted that he didn't get a chance to remember it. Seeing how Jae-won suddenly lost his nerve when facing the con artist made Kyung-joon curious as to why Jae-won just let her go.
진짜 얘는 뭔데?
Kyung-joon shared similar news with Seo-rin, which immediately became the main topic while she was eating with Kang-gun and Eun-ho. In fact, Kang-gun openly supported Jae-won's decision to drag the woman to the police station. Actually, Eun-ho felt offended and couldn't accept being belittled, let alone being called a scammer. Eun-ho could only lament her unexpected reunion with Jae-won, which ended up causing her new pain. That night, while Kang-gun was writing, Eun-ho tried to cheer herself up by blasting loud music. Apparently, she wanted to forget her sadness by dancing her heart out. Feeling disturbed because he couldn't concentrate, Kang-gun scolded Eun-ho and invited her to have dinner together. Kang-gun tried to understand what his friend was feeling. He went to the kitchen and accidentally read several pages about the advertising strategies Eun-ho was planning to propose to her potential client. A few days later, Kang-gun talked about Eun-ho's anxiety and changes in behavior. Her mood could suddenly change drastically. Sometimes Eun-ho would dance all day, but there was also a time when she cried for no apparent reason while watching a comedy movie. And worst of all, this morning, Kang-gun found Eun-ho talking to herself in the bathroom and cursing at herself. Kang-gun suspected that Eun-ho was depressed because she still hadn't found a job, so he asked Kyung-joon if he knew anyone and handed over the proposal that Eun-ho had recently prepared. That very day, Kyung-joon gave the proposal to Jae-won because they happened to be looking for a marketing agent for the project they were working on. Jae-won wasn't very interested in talking about it because at that moment they were waiting for a client who wanted to renovate her house. The client was a young mother who was planning to renovate the house she inherited from her parents. Not long after, the client's husband arrived, and it turned out to be Min-soo, Eun-ho's ex-boyfriend. Kyung-joon was very surprised because all this time he thought Min-soo was a coward who had the heart to leave Eun-ho. But now that man was actually married and had a 9-month-old child. Seo-rin, who was in the room, immediately approached Min-soo and hit him on the head. She let out her anger and took revenge for the suffering Eun-ho had gone through after being abandoned. Jae-won tried to break them up, but Seo-rin's anger could no longer be controlled. She even poured cola all over the couple. Seeing Seo-rin pushed to the ground, Kyung-joon couldn't accept it and started beating up Min-soo. Jae-won could only resign himself to the fact that his project had to be cancelled this time. He was also annoyed because they were fighting over personal matters in his office. Kyung-joon's reckless behavior could even get him reported to the police for assault. When he returned to his office, Jae-won realized that the proposal Kyung-joon had given him earlier that day was from Eun-ho, a woman he knew as Sana. Jae-won tried to find Eun-ho's address and phone number from the proposal Kyung-joon had brought. Unfortunately, when he finally managed to reach Eun-ho, Jae-won ended up overhearing a conversation between Eun-ho and another man. After hearing Sana, also known as Eun-ho's, voice over the phone the previous night, Jae-won became frustrated. He couldn't sleep because it turned out that Sana was now living with another man. For years, Jae-won has tried to forget Sana, but she seems to be doing just fine and is able to date again. Jae-won's feelings are understandable, since he doesn't know that Kang-gun is just Eun-ho's close friend. For Jae-won, at the very least, Sana should have ended their relationship first if she wanted to be with someone else. He never expected that Sana was actually very close to him because she was friends with Kyung-chung and Seo-rin.
딴 사람들한테 내 얘기 좀 전하지 좀 마. 지금 나만 찌질해 보이.
Meanwhile, Eun-ho is enjoying her time with Seo-rin by exercising in the park. Seo-rin deliberately invited Eun-ho to work out because she had been spending too much time at home. Seo-rin isn't ready to tell her yet that she ran into Eun-ho's ex-boyfriend yesterday, who is none other than Min-soo. While having a meal with her two friends, Eun-ho receives a phone call offering her a job. She is then asked to give a product advertisement presentation at a company.
아, 네, 옷쓰리 이은우입니다. 네, 맞아요.
Upon arriving at the office, the secretary informs Jae-won that the O3 advertising agency is quite competent and seems like a good partner for the project they're working on. Jae-won, who knows that the agency is Eun-ho's, tries to refuse by saying he wants to review it first. Curious, Jae-won then asks Kyung-joon about Eun-ho. So that Kyung-joon doesn't get suspicious, Jae-won claims that because of Eun-ho's issue the other day, they lost a client. Jae-won also asks if that male client ever almost married Eun-ho. Kyung-joon explains that Eun-ho originally lived with her boyfriend in Busan, and the man promised to marry her after he got a job in Seoul. However, that jerk ended up cheating on her with a coworker, and the woman got pregnant. Eun-ho's sadness only grew because she also failed to get her dream job. Since then, Eun-ho disappeared for 3 months. She couldn't even be reached, which made Seo-rin sad and left her crying all day.
너무 걱정 마요. 기회는 이때다 하고 긴 여행이라도 갔을지요.
Kyung-joon brings up whether Eun-ho is qualified to participate in the tender at their company. He also invites Jae-won to stop by Eun-ho's house the next day to discuss the proposal and have a barbecue party at the same time. Jae-won feels conflicted about Kyung-joon's invitation, especially when Kyung-joon brings up a male writer who also shares a place with Eun-ho. At the same time, Seo-rin tells about her meeting with Min-soo. Now, they are convinced that Eun-ho's disappearance back then was because Min-soo betrayed her.
은호 만나던 중에 바람핀 거 아니야? 걔 아직 부산에 있대?
The presentation that Eun-ho delivered in front of the clients impressed them, even though they didn't immediately hire Eun-ho, who appeared confident. That night, Kang-gun brought up the necklace Eun-ho was wearing, which had a pendant of a pair of rings. Seo-rin was actually unsure whether those rings were the engagement rings between Eun-ho and Min-soo. They were left wondering whether Eun-ho now has a new lover. In the end, Kyung-joon told the story about Jae-won, who almost became an alcoholic, after he was played by a woman who also stole his camera. Hearing that made Eun-ho uncomfortable because the conversation was starting to point at her, especially when Kang-gun cursed the woman who had toyed with Jae-won's feelings, saying she deserved to be dragged to jail. Just as they started tasting the expensive drink, Kyung-joon got a call from Jae-won, who was already waiting outside. Eun-ho was shocked to find out that Kyung-joon had actually invited Jae-won to his house. Since she couldn't avoid it anymore, Eun-ho could only accept her fate when the man she had been trying to avoid was now right in front of her. Jae-won, feeling very awkward, greeted Eun-ho and asked how she was
처음
doing.
뵙겠습니다. 박재원이에요.
When Jae-won saw the bottle of liquor that Kang-gun brought out, he felt like he had owned it before, but he tried to ignore it because he knew this was all Kyung-joon's doing. They all took a drink together and made a toast. Kyung-joon then asked Jae-won about the ring he had thrown away after meeting the girl who stole his camera. Unexpectedly, Jae-won ended up venting his disappointment and asked Eun-ho about the meaning of a relationship. Eun-ho's indifferent answer made Jae-won even more upset, leaving their friends puzzled because the two of them suddenly started acting strange. They assumed Jae-won was still emotionally unstable and asked Eun-ho to be understanding. Kyung-joon and Kang-gun's conversation also turned to the ring Eun-ho had, which is now a pendant on her necklace. They asked again if Eun-ho already had a new boyfriend. Eun-ho looked a bit nervous when her friends bombarded her with so many questions. Eun-ho then said that even if she did have a lover, she wouldn't go around sharing her love story with her friends. To change the subject, Eun-ho went to the restroom, with Jae-won following her under the pretense of wanting to give her proposal back.
야, 이거 내가 갖다 줄게. 너 지금 화장실 좀 가야 돼.
그럴래?
Feeling awkward about the situation, Eun-ho tried to calm herself down by washing her face. She was curious because Jae-won's reaction when he first saw her seemed so normal, as if he already knew a lot about her life, including where she lived. Eun-ho was startled when Jae-won suddenly approached her. He said that Kyung-joon still thought that her coming here was just to hand over the proposal. Jae-won had just found out that son or Eun-ho was actually that close to Kyung-joon. At that moment, Jae-won just wanted to confirm one thing, whether the Eun-ho listed on the proposal that was sent was the same Eun-ho, the girl he met at the police station. After learning her true identity, Eun-oh instead told Jae-won to leave because there was nothing left to talk about. The way Eun-oh ended things so abruptly made Jae-won unable to accept it because the Sun he knew before would never have dumped him like a loser. Jae-won finally left Eun-oh after saying a harsh line, telling her that everything about her was full of lies.
이윤호는 이런 성격이었구나. 준선아 난 그랬는데.
Eun-oh felt deeply hurt seeing the man she loved walk away with such a look of disappointment. She felt ashamed for having to lie to herself, when in reality she still hoped Jae-won would come back to her. While tidying up the table, Eun-oh asked if it was Kang-gun who gave the proposal to Kyung-jun because she was actually pessimistic about being able to work together with Jae-won's company. Frustrated that her identity had been exposed in front of Jae-won, Eun-oh drank all the expensive wine Kyung-jun had given her until there was nothing left. Kang-gun then went looking for Eun-oh, who at that moment was not in her room. It turned out that, dragging her large suitcase, Eun-oh was staggering around aimlessly, not knowing where she was going. At a street intersection, Eun-oh ran into Kang-gun's ex-girlfriend, who was also drunk. The two girls got into an argument because Sung-yoon thought Eun-oh was the reason Kang-gun left her. Still not over her ex, Sung-yoon decided to look for Kang-gun because she missed him so much. Eun-oh then explained that Kang-gun was at her house now and quickly walked away from Sung-yoon. She then got on the bus feeling empty, remembering what happened some time ago when Min-soo betrayed her. At that time, right before her eyes, Eun-oh saw Min-soo at the house that was actually meant to be their marital home. Heartlessly, Min-soo brought his mistress to stay there and broke up with Eun-oh, saying he was bored and didn't love her anymore. In that devastated state, Eun-oh took her suitcase to a motel and threw her phone in the trash. The next day, because she couldn't be reached, Eun-oh lost her chance at a job since the company hired a more enthusiastic and determined candidate. Eun-oh felt, deep down, that she really did seem just too ordinary to ever get what she truly hoped for.
문자도 남기고 이메일로도 알렸다던데.
In the midst of her despair, Eun-oh called her mother and lied, saying that she was doing just fine. Her wedding with Min-soo had to be cancelled because Eun-oh told her mother that Min-soo had an assignment abroad. But in reality, at that time, Eun-oh felt completely lost. She could only lament her fate on the bus until it reached the final stop. It was that very bus that ended up bringing her to her encounter with Jae-won. The next day, Eun-oh arrived in a coastal area near Yangon Beach. She saw a small shop selling ramen. From that moment on, Eun-oh didn't want to be just an ordinary person anymore, so she started choosing menu items that few people ever ordered. Eun-oh even finished off 3 bowls at once to vent both her frustration and her hunger. The shop owner eventually realized that Eun-oh seemed to be having some problems, so they decided to let her work there. When Eun-oh expressed her intention to apply for a job as a waitress, while she was there, Eun-oh wanted, even if just for a moment, to forget her weak, gloomy, and helpless personality. She then decided to temporarily disguise herself under the name Sun, an acquaintance who inspired her to become someone cheerful, determined, confident, and unafraid of anything. Back in the present, Eun-oh ended up falling asleep on the bus. Kang-gun tried to call Eun-oh, but she ignored him. Instead, Eun-oh sent a curse-filled message to Jae-won's number because he had hurt her feelings. Not recognizing the number that had just texted him, Jae-won immediately called it back. A bus driver informed Jae-won that the owner of the phone was a girl who was currently drunk and on his bus. After checking and realizing that the number belonged to the O3 marketing agency, Jae-won was convinced that the girl the driver mentioned was Sun, also known as Eun-oh. Without a second thought, Jae-won immediately went there to pick up Eun-oh, who was still unconscious. The next morning, Eun-oh woke up. She was very surprised to find herself in a completely unfamiliar room. When she looked outside the room, she saw a man cooking, who turned out to be Jae-won. Eun-oh still couldn't believe what had happened to her the night before. How could Jae-won have taken her in such a miserable state? Eun-oh intended to run away, but she was caught by Jae-won, who immediately offered her breakfast. Jae-won even answered a call from Kong-gun, making up an excuse that Eun-oh was currently busy in a meeting. Kong-gun believed him and felt relieved, knowing that Eun-oh was actually okay. Jae-won told her about what happened last night, including how his back almost broke from carrying Eun-oh into the car. He also showed the insulting messages that Eun-oh sent him last night, along with a message saying that she really missed Jae-won. Eun-oh felt embarrassed because she was caught still saving Jae-won's number under the name My Love. Jae-won also asked why Eun-oh had printed out all the photos of them together from before. However, Eun-oh actually hid when she found out that Jae-won was looking for her through Kyung-joon and Seo-rin. All this time, Jae-won was really tormented while searching for Sun-ah, to the point that he kept asking the owner of the ramen shop where Sun-ah used to work about her whereabouts.
근데 너 내 사진을 왜 찾았냐?
Eun-oh was still trying to lie to herself and asked Jae-won to forget everything that had happened between them. For Eun-oh, it was just her way of having fun, and she considered it something normal that many people often do. Hearing Eun-oh's answer, Jae-won was taken aback because the Sun-ah he knew before had never acted so harshly. Eun-oh emphasized that she was no longer the Sun-ah that Jae-won once loved, because Sun-ah was just a fake persona she created to escape reality when she was at her lowest point. She also hoped that Jae-won would stop looking for her.
그래서 우리가 뭐 혼인신고라도 했어? 어?
In the rain, Eun-oh left, which made Jae-won unable to stop thinking about her and eventually decide to go after her. After driving for quite a while, Jae-won finally found Eun-oh, who was taking shelter somewhere. He then invited Eun-oh to get into his car, intending to drive her home. Inside the car, Jae-won deliberately locked the doors and reclined his seat just to gaze at Eun-oh's face, which he had missed so much. Eun-oh felt annoyed, even though deep down she had also been hoping for this moment to happen. Jae-won then played music that reminded Eun-oh of the past. It turned out Jae-won was trying to make Eun-oh fall in love with him again and melt her heart.
나는 함부로 건드리지 말지, 응?
Long story short, when they arrived at Eun-oh's house, Jae-won intentionally got out of his car and walked her all the way to her front door. Not long after, from a different direction, Seo-rin and Kong-gun appeared, making the atmosphere even more awkward. They apparently realized that Eun-oh and Jae-won had just gotten out of the same car and seemed very close. While Jae-won and Eun-oh were confused about how to answer their friends' questions, Seo-rin actually assumed that Eun-oh had just come from a meeting at Jae-won's company. Eun-oh finally felt a bit relieved because her friends weren't suspicious. She then thanked Jae-won for giving her a ride home. Jae-won actually still wanted to spend more time with Eun-oh, so he very enthusiastically accepted Seo-rin's invitation to stop by Eun-oh's house.
아, 미팅한다더니 그게 오빠네 회사였구나?
Especially since they were going to eat ramen together. Eun-oh couldn't refuse Seo-rin's request to cook. Still annoyed by Jae-won's earlier behavior, Eun-oh deliberately didn't add any toppings to the ramen that Jae-won would eat. Actually, Eun-oh was reluctant to work with Jae-won because of her pride. However, Kong-gun reminded her that she shouldn't be picky about work, especially now that she's having financial difficulties. To make things even worse, the landlord also raised the rent, which made Eun-oh really angry.
누구 맘대로 그렇게 올려? 염정소리를 나 뒤지라는 거 뭐야?
Seeing Eun-oh suddenly cursing people out so harshly, Jae-won was surprised because this personality was completely different from the Sun-ah he used to know, and also very different from the gentle and quiet Eun-oh that Kyung-joon had described. In the afternoon, Eun-oh started preparing marketing materials for her project with Ju-won about opening an art gallery. When he got home, Jae-won checked Eun-oh's suitcase that she had left behind. But it turned out the suitcase was empty, which made Jae-won wonder where Eun-oh had gone that night. Because in reality, Eun-oh didn't really want to go far away. While working overtime, Jae-won was left feeling uncertain and wondered to himself whether Eun-oh had really forgotten all their memories together. He then checked Eun-oh's social media account, which goes by the name Agent 03. From the posts and photos Eun-oh shared there, it was clear that she actually still couldn't forget Jae-won. In fact, the girl saw Jae-won as someone who had brought her happiness and a new sense of enthusiasm for life. It was only then that Jae-won realized Eun-oh had been hiding her feelings all this time. That very night, he went to Eun-oh's house. At the same time, Eun-oh, who had just picked up a package of hers, heard a commotion outside. It turned out that at that moment, Jae-won had accidentally hit Eun-ho's car side mirror because he wasn't paying attention while parking his car. Jae-won then realized that Eun-ho had been watching him the whole time and knew he was there. The two of them ended up arguing about who was at fault for the parking mishap. Eun-ho was briefly fed up when Jae-won referred to her as his ex-wife. She believed that the whole fake marriage incident happened because Jae-won was the one who first flirted with and seduced her. The argument ended when Eun-ho kicked Jae-won's car, and by accident, her necklace broke and her ring rolled away. Jae-won immediately recognized that the ring was the one he had thrown into the river. Realizing that her ring was missing, Eun-ho immediately started looking for it. She tried to hide her embarrassment over still keeping the wedding ring, which meant that Eun-ho still had feelings for Jae-won. At that moment, Jae-won pressed Eun-ho to honestly answer how she truly felt right now. Eun-ho actually felt embarrassed at the thought of her friends finding out she once pretended to be Sana at Yangon Beach, and that, by coincidence, Jae-won was Kyung-jun's cousin. However, for Jae-won, it was completely unfair to use that as a reason for them to break up.
이거 우리 결혼 반지 맞잖아. 반지 안 버렸잖아, 너.
To Jae-won's surprise, Eun-ho suddenly kissed him, finally answering his curiosity about how she had truly felt all this time. Jae-won also wasn't about to let the girl he loved walk out of his life again, so he gave her a passionate kiss for the second time.
나 아직 좋아하잖아.
The next day, Jae-won took Eun-ho's car to the repair shop after he found out that Eun-ho had tried to fix it with tape. Eun-ho finally returned Jae-won's camera so she could feel more at ease. Jae-won also returned Eun-ho's suitcase that had been left at his house. The two of them promised to mend their relationship and meet again for work matters.
잘 찾아봐.
Switching over to Kong-gun and Se-yeon. After years of an on-again, off-again relationship, Se-yeon finally said that she would never contact Kong-gun again. The two of them ended up drinking soju together at a small bar. Even though he's close to Eun-ho and Seo-rin, in Kong-gun's eyes, Soo-yeon is the most beautiful and sexiest girl he has ever known. In the end, Eun-ho comes clean to Seo-rin and Kong-gun, admitting that she is Sun-ah, the woman who once dated Jae-won at the beach. While crying, Eun-ho explains that the reason she disappeared was because at that time, she hated herself. She didn't want Jae-won to know her as the foolish Eun-ho, and she didn't want Jae-won to find out the real reason she was there.
너 그냥 옛날에 바보 같은 이유는 그대로야.
Although Seo-rin was initially disappointed that Eun-ho hadn't been honest with her, she still understood what Eun-ho had gone through and believed that Eun-ho wasn't a foolish girl, since everyone has experienced failure just like she had. They both hoped that Eun-ho would be herself, someone kind and warm to everyone. Eun-ho then realized that Jae-won had actually slipped a necklace into her suitcase. She didn't want to ask about Jae-won's reasons or intentions for giving her the necklace. The next day, Kong-gun and Seo-rin visited the art gallery that was about to be inaugurated. Both of them were happy because the place was designed by Jae-won and Kyung-jun, while Eun-ho acted as the event organizer to manage the opening ceremony. The mayor also came to present an award to Jae-won. After the event, Eun-ho invited Jae-won to talk on the rooftop of the building, bringing along the necklace that Jae-won had given her. Eun-ho asked if Jae-won was willing to accept her not as Sana, but as Eun-ho, who still has many flaws because she wants to heal from the trauma of her past relationships. Jae-won said that as Eun-ho gradually finds her true self, he will come to fully understand her and do his best to love her wholeheartedly. Jae-won put the necklace around Eun-ho's neck while inviting her to start a relationship and get to know each other better. The two of them kissed on a snowy night, and the movie came to an end.